And this CLG lineup made the final of MSI, Mid-Season Invitational, back in May. Just making the final assured them what was essentially already the best international finish in North American League of Legends history, because obviously TSM's international victory at IEM World Championship the year previously had not been at one of the major Riot events, and we think of the MSI as the second best event of the year after the World Championship in terms of international context, excluding stuff like LCK, obviously, which is very competitive. So just making that final already assured them that finish, and therefore with the best international finish and being NA LCS champions for that split, the obvious question became, were they the best NA team in history, which is a reasonable question to ask. I mean, not only did they have the best finish, but their macro looked comparable to the world's best teams, even very close to SK Telecom, when you consider the average of how SK Telecom played across the whole event. Then you got to add in the fact that that's something that you can't say for any of the other teams in history. Look at TSM back in 2012. They didn't necessarily know how to play the map as well as the Azubu teams did at the time. You look at Cloud9, obviously they had fantastic macro, but was it as good as like a Samsung Blue, for example? Yeah, it's hard to say. Early game, was it as good as Samsung White? No. You look at TSM that had won the IEM. Okay, they'd had good macro and they managed to make all the pieces work, but they never really were a threat to be the world champions. So on that level, sure, again, another reason why we have to put them forwards and discuss them. And then you got to add in that since they did it all essentially without superstar talents, this is even more compelling that they must have been a fantastic team as a unit. They didn't just do it with superstar players like TSM is doing right now. I mean, the only real player you could look at in this CLG lineup when they were at MSI and say this guy might be like the absolute one of the top 5 players in the world at his position is Aframu. He was playing fantastically from support and obviously the in-game leader, amazing shot caller. Sure, he was someone you could put up there, but the others you couldn't really. I mean, even as well as Darshan would play sometimes, it wasn't reasonable to say that he's like a top 5 player, top laner in the world. I mean, just the sheer number that they have in Korea kind of dwarf him, as we've seen when he plays against those guys. So since they had all these things going for them, I want to present the whole picture here and look at other aspects and the for and the negative, the positive and the negative, and then kind of try and answer the question myself. So first of all, let's go back to the spring split that they played in, the one that they won. Now, we can't just look at the end result, which is that they won the spring split, and go, right, they were obviously the best team in that spring split, and you know, since they won, they must have been dominant in some sense. That's one of the problems that goes against this team, actually. The level of dominance isn't really there. That's one of those factors that they don't have, even domestically, that some of the great teams in the past who were challenging for this title of best NA lineup in history do have going for them. Because in that NA LCS season that they won, they were obviously nowhere close to being the first place team because Immortals was absolutely unreal and only lost one game. So they weren't even the second best team for a bunch of the time. Like, they were only in second for 3 of the 9 weeks. They finished with a win rate of 72%. They won 13 out of 18 games. But again, they still lost 5 games. It's not like they were smashing everyone. This isn't comparable to Cloud9 30-3 run, 25 and 3 in the regular season, or 24-4 the next season, or some of the incredible runs we've had in history. Nah, not really comparable, not dominant in the same way, and obviously weren't even the best team in the regular split. Now, admittedly, they were the team that did beat Immortals, the only one to give them that loss. It was in week 7, actually. But even so, nowhere near the dominance Immortals actually showed in that season. Then you go to the playoffs, where obviously they did a lot of work and won. Okay, in the playoffs, the 2 series they played, semi-finals against Team Liquid and final against TSM, both 5-game series, so not particularly dominant in series play either. And okay, it's one thing to say TSM, because TSM got it together throughout the split, obviously smashed Immortals in a sweep in the semi-finals, and made it through to the final and got the 5 games of CLG. So we can admit that TSM got good by the end of the season, even though they had a terrible regular split. And now, almost the same lineup with the Yellow Star removed is fantastic in rolling the whole league. But you can't say as much for Team Liquid. Sure, Team Liquid improved over the split and became a good team, but they weren't legitimately an elite team, even by the playoffs there. And they weren't a team who would have had any chance if they'd gone to the MSI. So the fact that they took them so close, not a great sign. Obviously, you don't have to be dominant in every series, but what we're seeing here is sorry, I've got a cold. In LCS, even in the regular season and then even in the playoffs, they were never really dominant, but they won. Fair play, they won. But dominance is a factor that does count if you want to be the best in history. Then you go to the MSI itself. Despite finishing second at MSI, they weren't necessarily dominant there, if you're being realistic. Sure, in the group stage, huge props to them for beating both SK Telecom and Royal Never Give Up in a game. This is big time stuff. Those two teams were very dangerous. And SK Telecom, obviously, especially, they were the Korean champions. And they have a lineup which may yet go on to win Worlds yet. So maybe one of the all-time great lineups. If we're going to mention that, though, we're going to count these as legit wins, how can we not talk about the fact that they lost to Supermassive Esports, the wildcard team? They did. They lost the game to them. So even dominance in this group stage, not as sick as it might have seemed otherwise. And ultimately, since they didn't finish top of that group stage, in a weird way, they kind of actually... They weren't the best team in the group stage necessarily. RNG, obviously, by getting the first seed, fucked themselves because they had to play SK Telecom in the semi-finals, which it turned out no one could beat SK Telecom in the playoffs in series play. Then you've got to consider, okay, so in the semi-finals, they play Flash Wolves from LMS. Now, Flash Wolves did what Flash Wolves always do, which is they look good, lead into the series play. In series play, they always have, like, early leads. They always have points in the game where they're winning. They always have, like, one player, Maple, for example, who's going off. And then somehow they can't close games. They lose games late. They make bad decision-making. They take bad skirmishes, bad fights, and they lose series where the series says they lost 3-1, like it happened against Origin. And people say, oh, well, they obviously lost by a large margin. They didn't, and they get very much in these games, but they do lose nonetheless. That's the Flash Wolves that they beat in the semi-finals. But admittedly, they did beat them. They won 3 out of 4 games against them. Well done. But it's not like they smashed them. You go to the final against SK Telecom. Now, here's where I have my problems. It's true, I was impressed that CLG could sometimes get early game leads. That they could make decisions early on that, like, countered what SKT was doing. And SKT didn't just blow them out and rock all over them and completely wreck them and run rampage of them, despite the fact SK Telecom did sweep them in the final and CLG didn't win a game. Now, my problem with the final and how it was viewed by Westerners goes like this. So when Flash Wolves had advantages in the semi-finals, and then CLG won with superior decision-making and superior team fighting, people said, oh, well, it's irrelevant that Flash Wolves had those advantages then. You know, it's like who closes the game, who wins the game, who's better in the latter half of the game. This is all the things that matter to being a champion and the best team. Therefore, CLG was much better than Flash Wolves. Yet when CLG had these advantages against SK Telecom and looked like they were doing decently for the first part of games, people made the similar excuses themselves on the opposite side. Now they said, oh, but CLG had leads against SK Telecom. Oh, CLG are the ones who just couldn't close. Oh, CLG just couldn't capitalize on their opportunities. You can't have it both ways. You have to be consistent. So personally, I'm willing to have it the same way, which is I give Flash Wolves credit for their advantages and CLG for winning, and I give CLG credit for their advantages, but I give SKT ultimate credit. So it doesn't matter ultimately that SKT was so underwhelming in the group stage. They rocked those fucking playoffs and rightfully were clearly the best team by the end of the tournament. Now CLG, you can make a case they were the second best team here. I would make a case this is already something that I think unfortunately erodes a bit of the whole best international finish. Now, sure, it's the best international finish, so in the context of the other teams that you're talking about from NA history, yes, it's very well up there, it's an amazing finish, and I'd even probably say I agree it's the best finish ever. But, with that said, I would like to just point out that with the whole RNG situation where this bizarre thing happened, where the best team in the tournament somehow fucked around in the group stage, only finished 4th, and then RNG did a fantastic job in the group stage and then had to play that super dominant team and therefore went out top 4 but didn't get the final. I think there is kind of like a small asterisk here where you have to at least put that context in when you're talking about CLG's second place, because we never really would have known what could have happened if they'd have played against RNG in the semi-finals. It's actually a shame SK Telecom couldn't win 1 or 2 more games and we could have gotten that semi-final of RNG versus CLG. I think that would have been a hell of a semi-final. I would really have loved to know who'd win that. Maybe CLG, who knows? Now that we've kind of taken their accomplishments apart a bit and put in context that it wasn't so dominant, there's a lot of, every time they get something in advantage, beat SK Telecom RNG in the group stage, they lose to Supermassive Esports. Everything they get, they also get something taken away from them. So you kind of eroded some of the accomplishments there in the context of other people in history. Now, if we talk about the squad itself, now there's a lot of positives for the squad. So, first of all, they're very versatile in the styles they could play. Regular season, they were that team that was like splitting the map, just using pressure against people, macroing fantastically well. Come MSI, there's suddenly this team fighting team that's winning all these skirmishes and picking the right fights in the mid to late game, winning them. I mean, you could clearly see the sick shot calling from Afromu in this tournament. That was absolutely fantastic. So they looked like, wow, if they can do both aspects of these, before this split start, you're like, hey, maybe this is the best NA team ever. This team can do it all, which is something we'd never seen from teams in the past to be that good. They also were making use of everyone in their lineup in a meaningful manner. So Afromu was the best player, was playing a godlike support as it is, but then also as a sick shot caller. Then you got to add in Darshan. They really did a great job of knowing when to turn him loose to do split push, when to do a 1-3-1, and when to just bring him into the team fights, which has always been his problem in CLG lineups in the past. They had Hui, who I don't think is a good mid laner in the context of just a mid laner. I don't think he's a good mid laner. I don't think he's even vaguely approaching a star in terms of mid laner. But they managed to use him in this very unique way where they put him on these certain champions. So he'll be like engaged or disengaged champions, and he'll be there as a distraction or to keep people away from Stixay in this particular tournament. And he does a great job at doing that. And okay, people will focus him and kill him, and that's great. And as a result, it opens up space for other people to do work within the team. What an interesting use of a player. I mean, in a very, very minor sense, reminds me a little bit of High, where he would sometimes be the distraction in fights, and he'd play a Fizz or a Zed, and you'd have to take care of him. Meanwhile, it's letting someone else, Sneaky, whoever, balls, do a lot of damage and get a lot of shots in on your team. Or not on your team, rather, on the enemy. Xmithy was very solid here, probably a little bit underrated at this tournament. And Stixay was very solid, played a really nice overall game, had some decision-making questions around him, but the key thing is, was able to execute what he could do within his skill set, under pressure, and do what was needed for the team, and was a soldier, would do what he was told. So you got something out of everyone, and as a unit, yeah, very impressive stuff. The problem is, you think about some of the other teams in history. So... CLG, I don't think CLG in the past has a lineup that can compare with this one and even be in this discussion. Because the one that was the preseason one team that won World Cyber Games and some online shit, okay, there were no offline tournaments at the time, so I can't really count this as like some dominant run that puts them in the equation. Then the season one team that people don't remember won two tournaments, not with their lineup. They did both of those tournaments with a different sub each time. I think it was Salsay for one, and the other one was Voyboy. Then you got to go to TSM 2012. Now, I think they legitimately can be in the equation because in terms of international play, sure, they didn't play Moscow 5, who was the best team, and they didn't play the Koreans until halfway through the year, but they were very good, and they did beat out people like CLG EU, who were a very good international team. A number of European teams went to those MLGs, etc. And so they were no joke. They won 6 offline titles in 2012. They were in the finals of 7 tournaments. The only teams who beat them meaningfully during their really sick streak were the teams who were the Koreans. It was Frost and Blaze, who were absolutely some of the best teams in the world and some of the best of all time. I think this team very legitimately has to be in there, and people forget about them. Then you got to look at Cloud9, obviously the lineup, the classic one with High and Meteos. So, 2-time NALCS champions, 4 NALCS finals, top 8 at 2 Worlds, top 4 at an IEM World Championship. Very good team. I think overall, they probably have the widest resume and the most consistently very good play, but they never really hit the top peak. They were never close to the world's #1 team. They never really had an international finish comparable to making it to the final of this tournament. Then you got TSM early 2015, where they won NALCS and they won IEM World Championship, the one where they beat World Elite in the final. We never got to see what would happen if the GE Tigers made it there because World Elite upset them, but whatever, they made it there themselves. TSM, they won the tournament. They're very good in that sense. Winning LCS is pretty legit. Admittedly, NALCS had some issues at the time. I mean, you had Cloud9 was still very good. CLG still getting their shit together and kind of fell apart. So it wasn't the hardest season, but okay, still very legit. I think that team can definitely make a case. The 2 TSM teams are probably the most compelling case. And TSM, the current one, sure, they have a nice trajectory to be able to have this position one day, but they haven't even played the playoffs yet. They haven't won a tournament yet. They haven't played internationally in terms of what we want to see. So this is not a team where we can yet put them in the equation. So actually, of all these teams right now, who would I pick as the best NA lineup in history? Because the problem is, there are some ways in which I would pick the CLG one. Like I told you, the way the whole unit functioned, their macro got to a level internationally that I've never seen from an NA team before. Still do probably have the best finish, regardless of how many asterisks you put next to it. And did it playing essentially an effective style, not just around talent, which is what a lot of Western teams have done in the past. Then again, though, I could certainly see a case for making the 2012 TSM lineup. I could see the case for that still being the best NA lineup in history. I mean, C9 has the longevity, and they have an amazing ability to match up in one of the most competitive eras in history, and actually back when those Asian teams, part of the reason why I think C9 couldn't make the same sort of run that CLG did now is because back then the game could still be more individualistic. If you played against some team with some beast solo laners or god tier AD carry, you could just get your fucking body slapped. It didn't matter how good your macro is, they could just fuck your world up, and so that could always happen. I will have to add that caveat as well. So CLG did all this, but they also did it in the era when arguably the most team play is required, as in the team unit must function the most. It's not about smashing lane, Forgiven style, Uzi Eye style, Flame style, and then going into the mid game and winning off that one player being super fed. That doesn't work. It's around macro, it's around team play. So essentially everyone was forced to play their game, CLG's game, and that's what CLG wants to do anyway, and then they got their shit together as a team fighting team. So I will put that caveat in that I think they also were benefited from playing in an era which allowed them to kind of make up some of the gap for not having all-star players, that in the past, a team like the old Cloud9 with High Meteors got punished for not having enough all-star players compared to the Asians. So I think that did bridge the gap somewhat in the favour of CLG, but they still did it. They still had the advantage, but they took the opportunity and made the most of it. So I think in some senses you can, in other senses I'd stick with the TSM or the Cloud9. Depends which criteria you want to pick, and depends what you're being forced to pick.